My name is Natalie Quinn, and the last time I was invited to my family's annual charity gala, my brother shouted across a marble parking lot, "Your car is humiliating us, don't show up again until you grow up." His voice echoed off the high-rise walls of the Westbrook Country Club as heads turned champagne glasses paused midair and my stomach twisted into something unrecognizable. Let me be clear, my car wasn't falling apart. It was a navy blue 2012 Toyota Camry, clean, efficient, paid off. But to my family, appearance was everything, and to show up in anything less than a Tesla or Mercedes was akin to treason. I remember clutching my key fob tightly as if that would shield me from the burn of public shame. That night wasn't the first time my family made me feel small, but it was the first time I realized they'd stopped seeing me altogether. In their eyes, I wasn't Natalie, the daughter who once hand-sewed her prom dress to save money, or the sister who worked nights tutoring students in foster care. No, to them, I had become one thing, and one thing only: an embarrassment. I turned to walk back toward the valet line, my heels clicking against the stone tiles, trying to block out the whispers and raised eyebrows from the suits and gowns around me. But my brother's voice cut through again. "Seriously, what do you even do for a living, Natalie? Still tinkering with kids' apps? You're 30. That part stung more than I expected. Because, yeah, I still developed educational tools for underserved schools. Still coded late into the night in my tiny studio apartment while others were drinking wine on rooftops. But I never did it for praise or for people like him. I turned around briefly, just long enough to see his wife giggling behind her glass of Chardonnay, and my parents looking away as if I'd walked in naked rather than underdressed. What no one knew, what I never bothered to say, was that I had just come from a pitch meeting with the Department of Education. I'd been offered a chance to expand my software to 6 more states, impacting over 400,000 students. I'd chosen to keep it quiet. And I thought maybe one day they'd ask. Maybe one day they'd care. But that night told me all I needed to know. As I climbed back into my Camry, the shame didn't sting as much as it used to. There was something almost freeing about being underestimated. Because people like my brother, they only respect what they can see: the watch, the wheels, the wine list. They never look underneath, and they never ask about substance. If you've ever walked into a room full of people who once loved you only to realize you're now just a symbol of everything they don't want to be, leave a like, because you and we understand something deeper. And maybe you'll want to stick around. Because what they didn't see that night was what I'd been building in silence. And it wasn't a car. It was an empire. If that sounds like your kind of story, stay with me. The next part might change the way you think about success. I didn't go home right away that night. I drove around the city with my windows down, letting the cold air bite at my cheeks, trying to make sense of the embarrassment stitched into my skin. Every streetlight felt like it was staring at me, every lane change, like a question I didn't want to answer. The truth is, this wasn't new. That country club incident was just another chapter in a long-running saga called Why Natalie Isn't Like Us. My brother Grant is a venture capitalist. At 28, he made his first million investing in companies that profited from things like overpriced meal kits and subscription boxes that shipped imported air fresheners. My sister Julia owns 3 fashion studios. She calls them bespoke experiences. Their lives are clean and curated, every social post filtered through success. And then there's me. When I was 19, I turned down an internship at my dad's real estate firm to volunteer teaching coding in the inner city. I lived off granola bars and bike rides, but I felt more alive in those classrooms than I ever did at our family's summer house. That's when I built my first app, just a basic tool that helped ESL students pronounce tricky consonants. It wasn't flashy, but within weeks, every kid in that program was using it. I thought someone in my family would be proud. But pride in their world is conditional. The next Thanksgiving, I told them about a grant I'd received to develop a more advanced learning platform. My mom tilted her head and asked, "So, when are you going to find something stable?" Grant laughed and said, "You're like a real-life Pinterest board. Cute, idealistic, but not scalable." I smiled through it like I always did. But I remember sitting at the end of that table next to the dessert tray no one touched, wondering why helping thousands of kids didn't count as building something. Why coding alone in my apartment while eating frozen dumplings didn't feel like being serious. You see, they don't hate what I do, they just don't think it matters. They never ask how many students use my platform now, nearly 800,000. They never ask how many states I've expanded into 13 and counting. They never ask how I afford to live in a two-bedroom townhouse while driving an old Camry. And maybe that's the part that hurts the most. 'Cause they could ask, but instead they fill in the blanks with assumptions she's struggling. She's wasting her degree. She'll settle down one day when reality hits. But reality hit me years ago when I realized that helping a kid code their first program, or land a scholarship, or just believe they're capable of more, that's the kind of ROI I'll chase any day of the week. I remember one night 2 years ago, I was working late in a public library in Detroit, helping launch an after-school pilot program. My phone buzzed. It was Julia. She'd sent me a photo of her new Porsche with a caption, "Finally joined the grown-ups." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I was busy watching a 10-year-old girl from Yemen debug her first loop in JavaScript. When the program ran successfully, she looked up at me and whispered, "I didn't think I could ever do something like this." Tell me what car in the world is worth more than that moment. But again, they wouldn't understand. To them, success is the thing you wear, the house you live in, the name printed on your business card. To me, success is the ripple, what you build quietly, without applause. And yet, I still showed up to that gala. I still thought maybe this time they'll ask how I'm doing instead of how I look. Instead, they offered unsolicited career advice between sips of Merlot. You could still go corporate, my dad had said that night. Work in training consulting. You know something real. Real. It's funny how people define real only by what they can post on LinkedIn. But I've stopped arguing. Because I know who I am. And soon, they will too. Not because I shouted louder, but because truth has a way of echoing on its own. And I promise you when it does, it'll be deafening. The thing about being the odd one out in your family isn't the teasing. It's the slow erosion of acknowledgement. You become invisible, but only after you've been properly dismissed. By the time I was in my mid-20s, my siblings had already started introducing me at events as Natalie. She does something with kids and computers. That vague, dismissive label followed me like lint. No one asked for more. No one wanted more. My story didn't fit their narrative of ambition, so they left it in the margins. When I was 26, I bought my townhouse outright. It wasn't flashy, just a clean, modest place tucked into a quiet block in Northwood, where neighbors still wave when they bring in the trash bins. My dad asked why I didn't just take out a mortgage like everyone else said it would help build credit. I told him I'd rather own than owe. He looked at me like I had just turned down a trust fund. To be fair, they never truly saw my world. Not the rows of library basements turned into tech labs, not the overworked public school teachers who cried when we donated tablets to their classes, not the late nights eating cheap Thai food with my dev team as we fixed code glitches before a grant deadline. They saw the Camry. And in their world, that was enough. That's what made the country club gala so crushing. It wasn't just that they laughed at my car, it's that they weaponized it as proof of my failure. They used it to measure my worth, as if my wheels spoke louder than my work. I'd spent years building something that didn't look like success to them. I'd designed platforms that taught coding to kids in group homes. I'd trained single mothers to use spreadsheets so they could return to the workforce. I'd partnered with state libraries, community centers, and even juvenile detention programs to bring access where there had only been absence. But in my family, that translated to, she never outgrew her college idealism. They wanted suits and business cards. I had sneakers and lanyards. What they didn't realize was that while they were chasing prestige, I was building infrastructure. They counted their worth in square footage and stock options. I measured mine in access points and user adoption. I remember one particularly sharp moment during a family dinner 2 years ago. My brother Grant had just returned from London after closing a major hedge fund deal. My parents beamed with pride as he passed around photos of his new flat. Julia chimed in about her expansion into LA with her boutique brand. The room was warm with validation. Then my dad looked at me. "What about you, Nat, still tutoring?" I smiled and nodded. We just onboarded 6,000 new users in Illinois public schools. Silence. You'd think I said I bought a new toaster. That moment stayed with me. Not because they dismissed it, but because I realized they couldn't grasp it. To them, impact had to be shiny. If it didn't come with glossy photos or media coverage, it didn't exist. That's when I stopped explaining. I started documenting quietly, letting the numbers tell the story, building my company in silence, letting results pile up instead of reasons. And still a small part of me hoped they'd notice. Hoped they'd ask the right questions one day. Hoped they'd say, "Tell us more about what you're building." But the only thing they seemed to notice was my car. And when Grant followed me home that night, I knew exactly what was coming. Another lecture. Another well-meaning intervention. He didn't come to ask, he came to correct. What he didn't know was that his big speech, his perfectly prepared monologue about leveling up, it was about to collapse under the weight of three very unexpected revelations. And the first one was sitting behind a garage door he never imagined I'd own. By the time I pulled into my driveway, Grant was already stepping out of his Porsche like he owned the block. He didn't even glance at the neighborhood, a quiet, working-class area with trimmed hedges and two-car garages. I knew what he was thinking. Starter homes, people who plateau before they ever rise. He followed me up the walkway without invitation, his loafers clicking on the stone path I'd designed myself. I had spent the better part of a year turning this house into a space that functioned like a home and a command center, because when you're running a nationwide operation from your living room, every inch matters. He gestured toward the porch and said flatly, "You've been here, 4 years now? Don't you think it's time to upgrade?" I turned the key in my front door but didn't answer. I knew better. This wasn't a conversation. This was a statement gift wrapped in concern. Once we were inside, he glanced around, scanning for signs of success. A framed degree, expensive art, anything that might validate me in his eyes. But he found none. The walls were clean, my furniture minimalist, the lighting soft and focused. Nothing screamed wealth. Nothing screamed her. He looked at my dining table like it had insulted him. "You know what this feels like, Nat, like you're hiding." I raised an eyebrow. "Hiding?" "Yeah, like, you're afraid of moving forward. I mean, you've always been smart, but this doesn't look like someone who's winning." I nearly laughed. "What does winning look like, Grant? Glossy marble countertops? Or did you mean champagne on a balcony you barely use?" He bristled. "It's not about aesthetics. It's about trajectory, growth, assets that prove you're not stuck." I walked over to the window and looked at my Camry sitting peacefully in the driveway. It had carried me through snowstorms, road trips, and late-night meetings across the state. It had never broken down, never left me stranded. "Let me guess," I said, turning back to him. "You want me to get a real job, buy a luxury car, and join the parade?" "I just want you to stop settling," he snapped. "At your age, I was managing a $10 million fund and driving an M5. You're still living like a grad student." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel inferior. I felt amused. "You know, Grant," I said quietly, "you keep using words like trajectory, growth, success. But you've never once asked what I actually do." He hesitated, blinked. The pause was long enough to make him uncomfortable. "You teach coding or something, I don't know, educational apps for kids." There it was. I nodded slowly. "Right, that's what you think." He folded his arms. "So what, then? You're going to tell me that Camry outside is some kind of metaphor, that living modestly makes you superior?" "No," I said, heading toward the hallway. "But since you're so concerned about my trajectory, maybe you'd like to see where it's been leading." He followed reluctantly, probably expecting a second-hand home office and a dusty laptop. I paused in front of the garage door and held up my keys. "What are we doing?" he asked, half smirking. "Opening the part of my life you've never cared to ask about," I replied, pressing the button. The motor whirred to life, slow and deliberate. As the door rose, the late afternoon sun poured in, and that's when his smirk evaporated. Because sitting there polished to a mirror, shine under the custom lighting, were 3 cars. A jet-black McLaren 720S, a deep emerald green Porsche Taycan Turbo S, and a pearl-white 1967 Mustang Fastback fully restored. Grant didn't move. He just stared, lips parted, words caught somewhere between shock and denial. I didn't say a thing. I let the silence do the talking. Let him absorb the message written in carbon fiber and stainless steel. "You never knew me. You never asked. And now you don't know what to say." When he finally managed a whisper, it came out brittle. What is this?" I turned to face him. "You wanted proof of growth, right, of success." I gestured to the garage. "Consider this Exhibit A." And for once in his life, Grant Quinn had nothing left to say. "Hoi, ChatGPT." Grant didn't step into the garage, not right away. He stood at the threshold like it was a crime scene, trying to piece together how the narrative in his head had just shattered like tempered glass. He pointed slowly at the McLaren. "That car alone is worth more than most people's mortgages." "Correct," I said calmly. $10,000 paid in full. "And the Porsche, that's not even out yet in most markets. Ordered direct from Stuttgart, took 6 months to customize." He walked in now cautiously, as if afraid the floor might collapse beneath him. His hand hovered over the Mustang. "Is this original? Frame-off restoration? Down to the last bolt?" It was my 29th birthday gift to myself. You don't make this kind of money doing nonprofit work, Natalie. And there it was, his defense mechanism kicking in, trying to reestablish the rules of the world he thought he understood. You're right, I said, walking to the far corner of the garage where a narrow door led into a separate workspace. So let me show you what I really do. We stepped inside what looked like a tech CEO's war room. Triple monitor setups, touchscreen tables, racks of servers humming softly behind temperature-controlled glass. Dozens of sticky notes and wireframes covered the walls like battle plans. This, I said, gesturing to the room, is where I built MindSpring. Grant looked confused. MindSpring. What is that? I booted up one of the terminals and brought up our live dashboard. The screen filled with active session maps, user metrics, and contract logs. MindSpring is a cloud-based educational infrastructure I developed 6 years ago. It's now implemented in 1 to 300 public schools, 90 private institutions, and has licensing contracts with 7 state departments of education. His eyes scanned the numbers, revenue columns, partner logos, a live heat map, showing active users across the country. Our platform teaches digital literacy coding and advanced STEM prep to underserved students. We partner directly with school districts, removing the bureaucratic friction and democratizing access. Last year alone, we generated $62 million in revenue. Net profit, $29.4 million. Grant sank into the nearest ergonomic chair like the air had been pulled out of his lungs. You made almost $30 million last year? I nodded. And that's before our latest round of expansion. We just signed a pilot with the state of New York, estimated at $8.6 million over 36 months. But you never said anything. Would you have listened, I asked, not bitter, just honest. He didn't answer. You were too busy diagnosing my failure through a car window. Too busy telling me what success should look like without ever asking me what success means to me. He looked around again, eyes wide now. And all of this. This house, this lab, the cars. Paid for, no debt, no investors, no seed rounds or angel backers. I built this from my living room coding between ramen breaks and midnight anxiety attacks. Every contract I landed came from cold emails, grant proposals, and showing up to meetings where no one expected anything from a girl who drove a Camry. Grant blinked hard. I thought you were struggling. I said, but not in the way you assumed. I sat down at the console and clicked open a folder labeled Community Impact Reports. Rows of photos appeared, smiling kids in computer labs, graduation ceremonies, screenshots of thank you messages from students, teachers, parents. Impact is my metric, Grant, always has been. He studied the screen in silence, and for the first time in forever, I could see something shift in his expression. Not pity, not disdain. Wonder. If you've ever had someone measure your worth based solely on what they see, your clothes, your car, your silence, when they've never once asked what you're building quietly behind the scenes, then maybe this story feels familiar to you. And if it does, maybe leave a comment. Because some of us know success isn't what shouts loudest. It's what endures when no one's looking. I looked over at Grant and said softly, "You wanted me to prove I wasn't struggling. Well, welcome to the proof." He leaned forward, still staring at the screen. "Natalie, I think I owe you an apology." I smiled faintly. "Oh, Grant, you're just getting started." Grant followed me back into the kitchen, like a man in a trance, his world teetering between disbelief and awe. The stainless steel appliances, the clean quartz countertops, the subtle details he once overlooked, now took on new weight. I saw him notice the imported light fixtures, the silent automatic blinds, the custom woodwork on the cabinets. For the first time, he realized nothing here was random. "This house," he murmured, glancing around, "it's not modest, it's deliberate." "Exactly," I said. "Designed for efficiency, security, and scale. Every square inch serves a purpose." We sat down at the kitchen island. I poured him a glass of water because that was all I had to offer. No wine, no curated cheese board, just clarity. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" he asked. "Because I've spent the last decade trying to build something meaningful, not trying to convince people like you that it was meaningful." He flinched at that, and I didn't say it to hurt him. I said it because it was true. I used to think, I continued, that one day you'd all ask me. Ask what I'm working on. Ask why I look tired. Ask what keeps me up at night. But instead, you asked why my car wasn't new, why my nails weren't done, why I didn't act successful. So I stopped offering the answer. Grant stared into his water glass like it might reveal an explanation. "And the car," he asked. "I mean, why keep the Camry if you've got everything else?" I smiled. Because it works. Because it doesn't ask for attention. Because it gets me where I need to go without making me a target. He leaned back and exhaled hard. God, all those years. All the times we joked behind your back. I know. You do. Of course I do. You weren't exactly subtle. There was an ache in his silence now, a crack in the confident armor. He wasn't just processing my success, he was confronting his own blindness. We thought you were idealistic, a dreamer, someone who'd outgrow her causes. But I didn't outgrow them, I said softly. I scaled them. His eyes widened. You built an empire, and we never saw it coming. That's the thing about empires, Grant. The real ones don't rise with noise. They grow in silence until one day you can't ignore them. I pulled out my phone and opened a presentation deck I'd been polishing for an upcoming pitch. He watched, stunned, as slides flicked by growth projections, international expansion plans, AI integration for adaptive learning, gamified progress tracking. I explained our partnerships with local governments, our nonprofit scholarship arm, our workforce training pilot with Google. When the last slide showed a $94 million valuation, he rubbed his face with both hands. Jesus Christ. I leaned forward. And you still think my car defines me? He looked up finally, seeing me not the sibling, not the disappointment, but the architect. I don't know what to think. I tilted my head. That's a good place to start. Just then my phone buzzed again. Another message. I checked the screen and smiled. New update from our analytics team. Grant leaned in, still trying to anchor himself in this new reality. More numbers. Live usage stats, I replied. Right now we have 1.1 million active students learning on MindSpring platforms today alone. He looked like someone who'd seen a magic trick only to realize it wasn't a trick. It was work. Invisible, uncelebrated, tireless work. You change lives, he said quietly. I'm still changing them. We sat there for a while, surrounded by stillness, the hum of quiet power all around us. For the first time, Grant had nothing left to correct, compare, or compete with. Just one thought lingered in the air like an echo. What else had he misjudged? And as he looked back toward the garage, I saw it in his eyes. This wasn't about cars anymore. This was about the cost of never asking, of assuming silence meant smallness. He had finally seen the truth. But the question now was, could he carry it back to the family who still hadn't seen it? The sun had dipped low by the time Grant and I stepped back out to the driveway. The evening light hit the garage just right, catching the edges of the McLaren's body like a whisper of fire. He stared at the cars again, as if rechecking their existence, half expecting them to disappear to be part of some elaborate illusion. He finally asked, and the house renovated too. I nodded, top to bottom. Gutted the original layout, expanded the foundation, reinforced the walls for tech-grade insulation. I needed a space that could double as a residence and a functioning research facility. Everything here was planned. Grant's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. He just nodded slowly, processing. What he didn't realize was that this wasn't even the whole picture. Come on, I said. There's one more thing. He blinked. There's more. Oh yeah, you haven't seen the heart of it yet. I walked him down a small stone path that trailed behind the house, lined with hedges and warm ground lighting. At the end sat a second structure, what most would mistake for a guest house or detached garage. But when I unlocked the door and let him step inside, the breath caught in his throat. The space was massive, industrial-grade lighting, floors polished to a surgical sheen, walls lined with server racks, development workstations, testing stations, prototype benches. There was a sound-dampened pod for AI audio refinement and a control center with 6 ultra-wide monitors that tracked everything from code testing to field deployment. Grant spun in place slowly like a child stepping into a space shuttle. This is a development facility. Yes, I replied. Built it last year. $3.2 million in construction and equipment. It's where my core team and I build, test, and optimize every educational platform we deploy. He walked to a wall filled with framed certificates, awards, and patents. His eyes scanned each title, each signature. National Technology and Education Award. Innovation Grant for Underrepresented Student Support, Department of Education. Strategic Partner in K-12 Systems. And at the center, a photo of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Education at last year's National EdTech Summit. The caption beneath it read, "For transforming how America's children learn." He turned to me, hands slightly shaking. Natalie, why didn't you ever show us this? I let out a long breath, because I was busy building it. But all the dinners, the birthdays, you just sat there letting us go on about our ventures like we were royalty. You never asked, Grant, I said. You never once said, what are you working on these days? It was always still doing that cute tech stuff or you must be good with spreadsheets. So I stopped trying. He sat down heavily on a bench near the AI pod, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. We were so wrong. I know. You've built something incredible. Something huge. Something that actually matters. That's the word, isn't it? I said softly. Matters. You built portfolios, I built platforms, you funded companies, I funded futures. He looked up teary-eyed now, the weight of years crashing down on him. We treated you like a kid who couldn't grow up. And you were building a damn legacy. I walked over to the central dashboard and tapped the screen. Today I told him our software has been used in 47 states and 14 countries. We're closing in on 2 million students served. And next quarter, we're launching in rural Alaska, where kids still don't have basic internet infrastructure. We're installing satellite links and teaching them to code. Grant covered his mouth with his hand. You wanted to know why I drove the Camry? I asked gently. Because when you're building bridges across digital deserts, the kind of car you show up in doesn't really matter. He nodded slowly. And then as the weight of everything he'd ignored finally settled, he said what I never expected to hear. I need to tell them. Who? Mom, Dad, Julia, everyone. They need to know the truth about what you've done, about who you are. I walked to the window and looked out at the backyard where dusk had begun to blur the boundaries between sky and earth. Maybe I said, but not tonight. Why not? Because tonight, I'm going for a drive. He smiled through a breath that almost sounded like relief. Which one will you take? I glanced toward the garage where 3 symbols of silent strength waited. Maybe the Mustang. It's got a little grit in it. And as I reached for the keys, he said one more thing quiet, but filled with something I'd never heard from him before. Thank you for not giving up on us even when we gave up on you. I paused, then turned back to him with a small smile. I didn't do it for you, Grant, but I'm glad you caught up. If you've ever been underestimated, measured by surface instead of substance, this story's for you. And if you found your own way to shine, I'd love to hear it. Drop your story in the comments. Maybe it's time we stop letting other people define our finish lines. The next morning, the world looked the same, but something had fundamentally shifted between Grant and me. He'd left quietly the night before after our walk through the lab, after seeing every corner of what I had built brick by brick while the rest of the family assumed I was drifting. There were no more insults, no more comparisons, just a stunned silence that finally made room for truth. But the story wasn't over. At 9:12 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Grant. Mom wants to have brunch this weekend. She says we need to talk. I didn't tell her everything. Just that she needs to hear it from you. I stared at the message for a long time. Brunch. The most civil-controlled battlefield in our family. A table where the pancakes are powdered with judgment, and the syrup's always a little bitter. I texted back one word, fine. But before that happened, I had work to do. That afternoon, I logged into the MindSpring executive dashboard and reviewed the contracts pending legal. 2 states, Arizona and Massachusetts, were finalizing statewide implementation agreements. Combined value $18.3 million over 3 years. I flagged them both for legal review. Then I flipped over to the nonprofit side. The Bridge the Code initiative we'd launched 6 months ago in partnership with a Chicago-based youth center had crossed a milestone, 3,000 active users, in under-resourced communities with over 68% completing full coding courses. That same initiative had helped 4 students land internships with major tech firms last month. None of that was visible on Instagram, but to me it was the metric that mattered most. Later that evening, I got a call from Jasmine, one of our regional program leads. Hey Nat, she said a little breathless. You won't believe who just confirmed keynote for our Summer Educators Summit. Who? Professor Dean Axton, Stanford. I blinked. The Dean of Educational Design. Yep. Said he's followed your work since the MIT paper you published in 2018. He wants to collaborate on a joint research lab. I exhaled slowly. Thanks, Jazz. That's huge. I know, we're just getting started, huh? Always. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked around my home office, the one Grant had stared at like it belonged in a movie. The triple monitor setup, the 3D printed prototype of our latest gamified learning module, the wall of whiteboards scribbled with equations and UX flowcharts. And I thought about how easy it had been for everyone in my family to reduce me to one line. She works with kids. How convenient it was to minimize something they didn't understand. But the thing is, when people don't understand you, they don't ask questions. They just build stories around your silence. And if you're not careful, you start to believe them too. For years, I let their assumptions define the volume of my voice. I let their language of wealth and achievement make me feel like mine was a dialect that didn't count, until I realized I wasn't speaking the wrong language. I was building an entirely new one, and the world was finally learning to read it. At dinner that night, I sat alone with a simple salad and a notepad full of development notes. No champagne, no live jazz quartet, just a quiet kind of purpose. Then my phone buzzed again. Incoming call, Dr. Sandra Yates, DoD Office of Innovation. I froze. The Department of Defense had been circling us for months, exploring the possibility of adapting our tech for military training applications. I answered. Dr. Yates, this is Natalie Quinn. Ms. Quinn, her voice was crisp and measured. We've reviewed your adaptive learning framework. I'd like to discuss a preliminary contract possibly in the range of $45 to $50 million over 5 years. Are you available to meet next week? My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. I'd trained for this. Yes, let's set something up. After the call, I didn't scream. I didn't post about it. I didn't even text Grant. Instead, I walked to the garage, stood in the middle of those 3 cars, and whispered to the walls that knew the truth of my journey. Let them keep underestimating me. Because while they were watching for the shine, I was building something that couldn't be ignored forever. And now that it had started speaking for itself, there was no going back. If you've ever been doubted, dismissed, or deemed too small to matter, maybe you'll understand. The most powerful thing you can do is keep building anyway. And then one day, invite them to see what they never cared to ask about. 3 days later, I stood in front of a long mahogany table at the Montclair Brasserie, my mother's favorite brunch spot, where the mimosas were always bottomless and the conversation never was. The whole family was there, my parents sitting side by side like they were still co-chairs of some social board. Julia draped in a beige blazer that probably cost more than my whole week of meals, and Grant strangely quiet for once, nursing a cup of coffee like it was penance. It was the first time in years we'd all been in one place without a wedding or a funeral. I slid into the empty chair they'd left at the end of the table. Morning, I said. My mother smiled tightly. Natalie, thank you for coming. I just nodded. So Julia said, her voice airy and clipped. Grant's been vague. He said there's something important we need to know. Grant cleared his throat. There is. He looked at me as if asking for permission. I gave a small nod. Go ahead, let's do this. Grant turned to the rest of them. Natalie's not who you think she is. My father raised a skeptical brow. Is this an intervention? No, I said. This is a recalibration. I pulled my tablet from my bag and tapped the screen. On cue, the slideshow appeared on the TV, mounted above the fireplace images of MindSpring's work students in classrooms, graphs of usage headlines from EdTech publications. That's my company, I said calmly. It's called MindSpring. I built it from scratch. Julia blinked. You built that? We're currently deployed in 47 states. Over 1.7 million students use our platform daily. We partner with public schools, charter programs, juvenile centers, and soon the Department of Defense. My father leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying, I replied, keeping my tone even, that while you were asking me about real jobs, I was closing multi-million-dollar contracts. While you mocked my old car, I was paying for development labs in cash. While you offered to send me resumes for entry-level training roles, I was hiring PhDs to run nationwide STEM programs. The room fell silent. You could hear the clink of forks from other tables, but ours still. Julia shifted in her seat. Why didn't you ever tell us? I met her gaze. Because telling you wouldn't have made you listen. My mother folded her napkin fingers, trembling slightly. But you drive a Camry? I smiled. Because it's efficient. Because it doesn't scream, look at me. And because the last thing I want is to show up at a school district board meeting in a Lamborghini and get dismissed before I even speak. My father rubbed his forehead. You're saying you're wealthy. I paused, then answered plainly. I'm saying I own a tech company with current contract valuations exceeding $300 million over the next 5 years. And yes, my net worth is significant. Julia let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. We thought you were just drifting. I know. We thought you needed help, Mom whispered. I needed space, I corrected. To work, to grow, to prove that success doesn't need your permission. Grant leaned in now, emboldened by the truth. She's the real deal, Mom. Dad. She's not just successful, she's reshaping how this country educates its most vulnerable kids. My mother's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I didn't say it was okay, because it wasn't. But I did nod, because it was enough for now. The waiter came by with another round of drinks. My father waved him off, still stunned. Finally, he looked at me. What happens next? I smiled. I keep building. He nodded slowly. And the rest of us? That's up to you. We sat there, the four of us, in silence that for once didn't sting. Julia looked down at her mimosa. So, what kind of cars do you really drive? Grant laughed, genuine this time. Let's just say her garage would make a dealership jealous. Julia looked at me with a strange expression somewhere between disbelief and admiration. Well, next time, maybe take the McLaren. I raised an eyebrow. Only if you promise not to call it a midlife crisis. She smirked. Deal. And for the first time in years, we all laughed. Not out of habit, but out of recognition. Something had changed. They finally saw me, and I had never needed it, but it felt good to know it. If you've ever sat at a table where people talked over your silence, where they mistook your quiet for weakness and your modesty for mediocrity, know this. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build so well that even your doubters ask for the tour. And when they do, don't apologize. Just open the door. 3 weeks passed. The brunch came and went, the whispers faded, but the shock lingered. I could feel it ripple through every phone call, every hesitant text message, every awkward just checking in that came from family members who used to forget my birthday. And then came the email. Subject: keynote request, Harvard Education Futures Summit. My fingers hovered over the trackpad as I read the body twice, then a third time. They weren't just inviting me to attend. They wanted me to headline. The email detailed the theme of this year's summit: scaling innovation with equity, and said my work with Mindspring had become a model across Ivy League policy studies and international think tanks. I sat back in my chair stunned, and without meaning to thought about my father's voice at that gala months ago. Teaching kids to type isn't a business plan, Natalie. No, it wasn't. It was a revolution. And now even Harvard had noticed. That same afternoon, as if timed by fate or irony, I got a call from Julia. Hey, she started cautiously cheerful. I heard about the Harvard thing. I raised a brow, not even asking how she found out. That's kind of a big deal, she added. Kind of, I said with a half smile. There was a pause. I was thinking, she said slowly, maybe next month when you're back in the city we could grab lunch, just the two of us. I didn't reply right away, not out of pettiness. I just needed a second to check in with myself. Was I ready to offer more of me to someone who had once made me feel so small? Finally, I answered maybe. Okay, she said quickly, as if afraid I'd take it back. Just let me know. As I hung up, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't carrying their past judgments like a weight. I wasn't replaying every eye roll or every passive-aggressive comment about my clothes or my car. Something had lifted, and I didn't need revenge. I had truth. That weekend, I took the Porsche out for the first time in months. Not to impress anyone. Just because the sun was out, the road was open, and I felt like it. As I merged onto the highway, the engine's soft growl beneath me, I passed a billboard advertising a luxury condo tower downtown. In big letters it read, "Success starts with the right address." I laughed out loud, because I used to believe that too. Used to think that success had a zip code, a dress code, a code of conduct that required you to be loud, shiny, polished. But real success is knowing what you're building even when nobody else does. It's sitting in silence while others talk, because you know your work is speaking in places they've never been invited. It's letting your impact do the introducing. At the next exit, I pulled off and drove toward one of the community centers. Mindspring had helped fund a converted warehouse where kids learned to build robots on Saturday mornings, and teenagers coded their first websites under the flicker of donated LEDs. I parked, got out, and stepped inside. A group of high school girls was huddled around a computer, troubleshooting a glitch in their VR simulation. When they saw me, they waved like I was a familiar auntie instead of the founder of the platform they were using. Miss Quinn, one of them beamed. We fixed the bug in Module 3. I grinned. That's amazing. You'll have to show me. And just like that, I was exactly where I wanted to be. No country clubs, no brunches, no curated photo shoots. Just grit growth and a future being built line by line, lesson by lesson. And as I watched one of the girls explain her debugging logic to the others, I thought to myself, they'll never care what car I drove here, but they'll remember who showed up. If you've ever been underestimated, measured by what you lack instead of what you build, then maybe you know how it feels to prove everyone wrong without raising your voice. And if that's your story, you're in good company. Let's keep building. And if this journey means something to you, share your thoughts in the comments. Because maybe the next young girl sitting quietly in the back deserves to know someone just like her already made it. It was late on a Wednesday night when I received the quarterly financial report from Janet, my CFO. The numbers lit up my screen in clean, quiet confidence. Revenue $22.1 million, net profit $13.2 million, cash on hand $34.7 million. No fanfare, no media blast, just a simple email subject line Q2 results, all green. I leaned back in my chair, the hum of the servers in the next room a comforting presence. That quiet buzz had become the soundtrack to my life. Not applause, not validation. Progress. A ping followed immediately after. Janet, expansion funds healthy. Shall I greenlight the Seattle hub? I typed back one word, yes, because the time had come. The Seattle hub would be our fourth, joining Boston Austin and our original facility here in Northwood. With it, we'd be able to serve West Coast districts more efficiently, respond to testing needs faster, and onboard new development staff from the Pacific Northwest without relocation hassles. But more than that, it was a signal. A signal to the rest of the industry that MindSpring wasn't just growing, it was leading. I closed the email, stood up, and walked into the garage. The lights flickered on, automatically revealing the familiar trio: McLaren, Taycan, Mustang. But tonight, I wasn't here for any of them. I opened a slim cabinet on the far wall and pulled out something else entirely. A photo. It was one I'd kept hidden for years. A younger me, 18, standing outside a rundown community center in the Bronx. The building was tagged with graffiti. The windows fogged from inside. But my smile. It was fearless. That was the day I'd taught my first class. 8 students, 3 working laptops, and a projector that cut out every 20 minutes. But they learned, and I taught. And something ignited in me that never dimmed. Sometimes I look at that picture when I need to remind myself why I started. Because when you're running a multi-million-dollar tech company, it's dangerously easy to forget the purity of the mission that got you there. It's easy to chase scale and forget soul. But not for me. Because for every chart, every contract, every big win, I still measure my life by the little sparks that started everything. The kid who learned to build his first calculator app in Python. The girl who cried when she realized she could code her own art. The mother who emailed me last year to say her son got a full scholarship because of MindSpring. Those were the metrics I cared about. That night, after logging some final approvals, I got into bed and stared at the ceiling for a while. I thought about the gala, about the parking lot, about Grant's voice echoing across polished stone, yelling at me like I was a stain on the family name. I thought about how far I'd come from that moment, not just in wealth or power, but in peace. Because there's a moment that comes after you've proven everything you needed to, when the proving stops mattering. That's where I was now. No longer trying to be seen, just being. Then my phone buzzed, again. Another message, this time from someone unexpected. Dad, Grant told us everything. I'm still processing. But your mother and I are proud. I hope you know that. I didn't reply right away. I didn't know if I believed him. But I also didn't need it anymore. That was the strange gift of building something meaningful. You stopped craving credit for it. Instead, you built it better, stronger, louder in the ways that matter. Still, I texted back eventually. Me, thank you, I'm proud too. And that was it. No speech, no lecture. Just a closing of one chapter and the steady turn toward the next. As I lay there in the quiet, I thought maybe this is what success really sounds like. Not the roar of an engine, not the echo of applause, but silence, filled with purpose. If you've made it this far into the story, maybe you've felt it too, that shift from needing approval to creating impact. And if that's you, hit like, drop a comment, and share your own turning point. Let's remind the world that not all victories wear a spotlight. Some just live in the glow of what we quietly built and fiercely believed in. A week later, I found myself standing on the stage of the Harvard Education Futures Summit. The lights were bright, the audience filled with policymakers, CEOs, professors, and innovators from around the world. Behind me, a massive screen displayed the opening slide of my keynote, Empires of Quiet Scaling Innovation in Undervalued Spaces. My hands didn't tremble. My voice didn't crack. I'd spent most of my life explaining my worth to people who didn't want to listen, but here they were listening. I opened with the story I never thought I'd tell. My name is Natalie Quinn, and for a decade I was underestimated by the people closest to me, not because I lacked vision, but because I didn't showcase it the way they expected. I told them about my old Camry, the brunches filled with polite dismissals, the country club parking lot where my brother told me I was an embarrassment. But I also told them this. I built an educational platform from my living room that now supports over 2 million students across 47 states. We've donated over $20 million in infrastructure to schools that had never even seen a robotics kit. And last week I signed a defense contract that will help train the next generation of cybersecurity specialists in the US military. The room was silent. Not because they were bored, but because sometimes the truth stuns louder than any hype. Then I said the part that meant the most. And I did it all without waiting for permission. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous, it was intentional. People stood, not because I shocked them with wealth or branding, but because I reminded them what substance looks like when it's been buried too long under the surface of status. After the speech, a tall man in a tweed blazer approached me. "I'm on the board at MIT," he said. "Your name's come up more times than I can count. We're watching you with great interest." I shook his hand and simply replied, "Thank you, I'm just getting started." That night back at the hotel, I opened my inbox to a flood of messages. Some were from school superintendents. Others were from developers wanting to join Mindspring. But one caught my eye instantly. From Victoria Quinn's subject, "Just saw the Harvard talk." Victoria, my cousin, the one who once told me I dressed like a librarian and drove like a retiree? I clicked. "Natalie, I owe you the sincerest apology. I had no idea. Not just about your success, but about your clarity. Watching you speak today, I realized I've spent years chasing more without understanding what I was really building. You built something real, something that matters. Thank you for showing me what that looks like." I sat back in my chair, a strange ache rising in my chest. Not sadness, something closer to release. And it made me realize this wasn't about proving them wrong anymore. It never truly was. This was about reclaiming the story they refused to hear, then writing it louder than they ever expected. The next day, I returned home and walked out back to the development lab. My engineers were in a video call with our partners in Finland, testing the first cross-language AI module for bilingual classrooms. I stood quietly in the corner, just watching. This was why I never bought the penthouse. Why I stayed off the Forbes 40 under 40 radar. Why I never posted about deals or donations. Because this room, this quiet hum of innovation, was where the power lived. A few minutes later, I stepped into the office where a fresh data dashboard glowed on my central monitor. Live sessions 2,144, 793, user growth plus 6.7% engagement time, 31 sin. 3 mins average. Support tickets 3, resolved complaints 0. I smiled. This was how I measured my worth. Not by the price tags others saw, but by the impact they never bothered to look for. If you've ever felt like the world missed your message because it wasn't loud enough or branded enough, I hope you know this. Silence doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it just means you're working on something too meaningful to announce prematurely. And when it's ready, let it roar. If you're building something in silence, if you're tired of being overlooked just because you don't broadcast every step, drop a line in the comments. Let's remind each other that not all greatness is noisy. Some of it just hums, until the world can't ignore it anymore. Hoi ChatGPT. 2 months after the Harvard keynote, I stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony of our newest development facility in Seattle. It was raining, of course. That soft, constant Pacific drizzle that made everything shimmer, but never drowned out the noise. Except this time there wasn't noise. No booming speakers, no over-the-top celebrations. Just a gathering of our engineers, a few local educators, and rows of students from the very first district we partnered with in the state. The mayor was there too, but he stood humbly to the side. Because here, the spotlight wasn't on officials. It was on builders. We opened the lab, not with a champagne toast, but with a student-led demonstration, 3 high schoolers presenting a working prototype of a mobile education platform they'd designed using Mindspring's dev kit. The app was aimed at teaching financial literacy to middle school students translated into 5 languages. When the youngest presenter, a girl named Lila, finished her segment, she looked up at me with a spark in her eyes and said, "I didn't think I could ever create something that mattered." And just like that, every contract, every investor meeting, every dismissed family brunch faded from my memory. Because this girl, this moment, was the metric I never needed to explain. After the event, I stepped aside to take a video call from Janet, my CFO. "Nat," she said, "just got off the phone with the Pentagon." I blinked. "And they've greenlit Phase 2? They want full implementation across 5 military academies starting next quarter. Contract value $49 million over 4 years. I didn't gasp. I didn't jump. I just closed my eyes for a second, letting the drizzle soak into my blazer. Also, Janet added, "The media wants a quote. They're going to run a profile on you in Fast Company. You okay with that?" I chuckled. Only if they spell my name right. After the call ended, I found a quiet bench beneath a tree just outside the facility. I could hear the buzz of students inside laughing, debating algorithms, arguing about UX design. And as I sat there, I got another message from Grant. It was a photo. He and Julia were standing outside a local elementary school. She was holding a laptop. He had a Mindspring shirt on. The caption read, "Volunteering for Rollout Day. Thought you'd be proud." And I was, not because they finally recognized me, but because they were finally seeing the work. It reminded me of something I had once written in a late-night journal during those early ramen and code days. They'll never understand your passion until it makes a sound they can't ignore. So build until it echoes. That line lived rent-free in my mind all these years. And now the echo was everywhere. I stood up watching the clouds break just slightly, letting a sliver of sun hit the Mindspring banner above the door. I thought back to that first app I built for ESL students. The outdated computers, the flickering projector. The way they laughed when I turned math into a game. Back then, no one clapped. There was no audience, no LinkedIn write-up, no founder spotlight. Just code and a classroom. That was always enough. But standing here now, with impact spread across continents, with engineers working in labs I built from my own blueprints, with children speaking the language of opportunity fluently, I realized something powerful. I hadn't just built software, I'd built bridges. Bridges from overlooked neighborhoods to careers. From kids in silence to voices in boardrooms. From underestimated to undeniable. So if you're out there still in the early days, still hearing, what do you really do from people who think their title makes them fluent in truth? Let me whisper this to you. Don't explain, build. Let your impact be the translation. And one day when they finally ask, you won't have to raise your voice. You'll just open the door. And if you've ever had to do that, leave a comment. Let someone else find your story when they're still being told they're just a dreamer. Because dreamers build futures. And sometimes they do it so well the whole world eventually shows up just to say we were wrong. I hadn't planned on returning to the Westbrook Country Club, but sometimes life offers you the kind of symmetry you can't ignore. The invitation came in a gold-embossed envelope exactly like the ones they used to send out for weddings and fundraisers. Inside was an RSVP to the club's annual Founders Gala. My name was listed under Honored Alumna, Innovation and Social Impact. My first instinct was to toss it. After all, this was the place where Grant had once publicly shamed me for showing up in my Camry. The place where Mom had gestured at other tables filled with doctors and CEOs and said, "These are successful people." The place where no one had asked what I did, only why I didn't do more. But something inside me whispered, this time let them see. So I RSVP'd yes. The night of the event, I didn't arrive in the McLaren, or the Porsche, or even the Mustang. I arrived in the Camry, 'cause this time I didn't need the car to say anything for me. I walked through the lobby with my shoulders back, wearing a simple black dress, no flashy jewelry, just confidence. Because when you've already built the thing everyone doubted, the only accessory you need is truth. At the check-in desk, the young woman asked my name. "Natalie Quinn," I said. Her eyes widened and she smiled. "Oh, you're Natalie, the one from the Harvard keynote, the tech company." "That's me." "I loved your talk," she whispered. "My sister's using your platform in her high school." That alone was worth the drive. Inside the ballroom, familiar faces floated through the room, blazers, ball gowns, and bottomless flutes. Grant was there already, standing by the bar. When he saw me, his whole face lit up with something between pride and redemption. He walked over, hands in his pockets, and said, "You brought the Camry." I grinned. I figured it earned its right to be here. He laughed, then leaned in. "By the way, you're going to want to hear the intro speech." They went all in. I raised a brow. What does that mean? But before he could answer, the lights dimmed and a spotlight fell on the stage. The club president stepped up to the microphone, clearing his throat. Tonight, he began, we honor a woman whose quiet determination has transformed not just lives, but systems. She didn't inherit power. She built it. Not for herself, but for millions of students, teachers, and underserved communities across the globe. He paused. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our honored alumna of the year, Ms. Natalie Quinn." There was a beat of silence, then applause. Loud, real, no longer polite, no longer surprised. This time it was earned and understood. I stepped onto the stage with steady feet. No need to perform, just speak. I wasn't sure I'd ever stand on this stage, I began. Mostly because I never thought I'd be invited. For years, I was the woman who didn't quite belong. The car was wrong, the clothes were wrong. The conversation never included what I did because no one ever asked. The room shifted. People began listening in that way that only happens when they recognize themselves in your honesty. But I kept building, quietly, purposefully, because I believed impact wasn't something you had to dress up, it was something you had to live. I paused, then smiled. And now that you're listening, I'll say this. Success doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up late in an old car with no designer labels, but with a revolution in its back seat. The room exploded in applause, and as I walked off the stage, someone in the crowd yelled, "To the Camry!" Laughter filled the air. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, Grant came up beside me. "Never thought I'd say this," he said, "but that car of yours might be the most important vehicle in the family." I looked at him steady. It was never about the car, I said. It was about what I was carrying inside it. And for the first time, he didn't need an explanation. He just nodded. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of how you look, what you earn, or what you drive, let this be proof. You can still own the room. And when you do let them remember what they missed the first time, while they were watching for flash, you were building fire. 2 months after that gala, I sat on a quiet bench outside the Boston Development Center, our fifth and newest MindSpring facility. The fall air was crisp leaves spiraling off the trees like slow-motion confetti. Students were touring the lab for the first time. Local educators had just wrapped a workshop on adaptive curriculum tools. It was the kind of afternoon that didn't make headlines but changed lives. Behind me, the building hummed with purpose. Inside those walls, software was being developed that would teach computer science to kids in foster care. Tools were being refined to make learning accessible to children with visual impairments. A new AI module was being tested to personalize lessons based on how a child feels, not just how they score. And outside I sat alone, unbothered. 'Cause sometimes when you've spent your entire life being overlooked, there's something sacred about not being watched. My phone buzzed on the bench beside me. It was a text from Mom. "I watched your interview this morning. I cried. We never saw how much you carried." I stared at the message for a long time, and this time I didn't feel the urge to reply quickly, because I wasn't answering from a place of needing approval. I was answering from wholeness. I typed, "Thanks, Mom. I carried it because it mattered." Minutes later, another message came through, this one from Julia. "You made me rethink everything. Not just about you, but about me. I've spent so long chasing validation, I forgot why I started designing clothes in the first place. Do you ever resent us?" My fingers hovered. I thought about the dinners, the dismissive smirks, the way they never asked but always assumed. But I also thought about growth, about the space between what people meant and what they actually said. So I typed, "No, but I stopped needing your permission to be proud of myself." As I hit send, I felt it, the final thread of the old story loosening. I wasn't the outsider anymore, not because they had invited me in, but because I had stopped knocking. I looked down the sidewalk and saw a group of 6th graders entering the facility. One of them clutched a folder with "Code Like a Girl" printed in bright block letters. And it hit me this was the legacy. Not the contracts, not the speeches, but the ripple. The lives that would ripple out from this building, this platform, this once dismissed vision that had been called a hobby by my own blood. I stood walking slowly back inside. Janet met me in the lobby. "Just got off the phone," she said. "The Department of Education wants to expand nationwide. We're looking at another $62 million over the next 2 years. I nodded, taking it in, but I wasn't surprised anymore. Not by the numbers, not by the reach. Because I finally understood something. Impact isn't loud, it's layered. It builds quietly until one day it becomes undeniable. As we walked toward the conference room, Janet turned and asked, "Do you want me to send out a press release?" I smiled, no need. Because the people who mattered already knew, and the ones who didn't. They were finally starting to ask the right questions. Before entering the meeting, I turned back and looked once more out the glass doors. The sky was clear. My reflection stared back at me, not the girl in the Camry, not the invisible sister at the brunch table, but a woman who built something so powerful it changed the very air around her. And if you're still in that early stage, if your family still thinks you're just figuring it out, if your coworkers still call your side hustle cute, if your friends still ask why you haven't upgraded your lifestyle, listen to me. You don't owe anyone noise. You owe yourself substance. Keep building. Let your silence become the loudest legacy they never saw coming. And if this story reached a part of you that's been waiting to be seen, drop a comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the garage may have been quiet, but the empire inside, it was always roaring. There's a quiet power in being underestimated. In walking into rooms where no one expects you to matter. then letting your work speak so loudly that silence becomes the applause. For years, I thought I had to fight to be seen. I thought success meant proving something to the world that refused to see value in simplicity, in mission, in humility. But now I know better. Success is not what you wear, or where you live, or what you drive. It's not the loudest voice or the highest office. It's not the applause of people who never asked who you are. Success is waking up and building what no one thought you could. It's doing it again when no one's watching. It's creating impact that ripples out long after you've gone quiet. And more than anything, success is doing it without ever asking for permission. I used to shrink myself to fit their mold. Now I build blueprints so others can expand beyond theirs. So if you're sitting with a dream that feels too quiet for the noise around you, I'm here to tell you, you're not behind. You're not failing. You're simply building something they're not ready to understand yet. But they will. And when they finally show up asking, "Why didn't you tell us?" just smile and say I was busy building something real. If you've ever been dismissed, doubted, or told to be more realistic, this space is for you. Drop a comment below. Let your story be the bridge for someone else still finding their way. And if you believe in the quiet, steady power of becoming, subscribe, like, stay with us, because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of everything they never saw coming.